Hi Spring fans, welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. In this installment, we're going to take a look at a project that's fairly new called Spring Cloud Loadbalancer. Now, chances are you're not going to interact with Spring Cloud Loadbalancer directly often or at all, but it's super useful to know about, and you might have uses for it that go beyond our envisioned use cases, which are mostly to help you do client-side load balancing. Right now, that task is traditionally handled by Ribbon, Netflix Ribbon. We've got an instance of Netflix Ribbon. We've got Ribbon configured in Spring Cloud by default. But you can use Spring Cloud Load Balancer if you like instead. Ribbon is, I think, what is it now, maintenance mode. So I think the plan is that eventually that's not going to be a viable place to park our business logic, and that's fine. So we've released a new version of Spring Cloud Load Balancer that will support your use cases here. So today we're going to introduce that, but of course in order to do that we need to have a few things working. First of all, we need to have a service registry. So I'm going to create a Eureka service here, like so. Java 13, Eureka-server, Lombok, and go. Okay, so let's create that. Open this up in the IDE. Alrighty, so not a lot to do here in the Eureka service registry. It's just infrastructure. Actually, you can use a platform like Cloud Foundry has this. For example, if you go to Pivotal Web Services, Azure Spring Cloud gives you this, right? The Azure for Spring developers, the partnership between VMware and Microsoft. Okay, so enable Eureka server. Okay, there you go. Server port equals 8761. Looks good to me. We want to make sure it doesn't register itself. Okay, false. Fetch registry, false. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's run that, start it up. That should spin up on port 8761. Okay. There we are. Now we need to create a service that can talk to it. So go back to start.spring.io. Actually, I've got this here, don't I? So let's just reuse this API. We're going to use the reactive web support as well. And rather than using this, we're going to use the Eureka client. And that's it. That's a pretty Spartan service, but that should do it. Let's go ahead and spin that up. All right, UAO API. What's going on? Idea downloads API XML. Well, okay, IntelliJ doesn't want to play with me anymore, so we'll just do this the old-fashioned way. Okay, downloads API. Open as a project. Okay. All right. So API application, nothing fancy here, friends. We're just going to create a simple HTTP endpoint that we can make it calls to. Okay. Server response, routes, .get. So I'm going to call this greetings, new handler function, and we just want to return a response. So I'm going to say return server response, and we've talked about the functional style here, right? You've seen this before. This is not new. Greetings, hello world. All right. Good. Lambda static import, whatever. Okay, there's our entire endpoint. We want this to register with the registry so that it's advertising its presence for others to find it. So we'll give it a name. We're going to call this imaginatively API. I know. Amazing. So run this on port 9000. Okay. And start this one. And this one hopefully is now visible. Let's test it out. Good, there it is. So there's our application, our data. Now let's create a load balancing client. Okay, we'll go back here, start.spring.io, and we're gonna keep basically everything that we've got. So we might as well just reuse this. We're gonna call this client, but we also want Spring Cloud Load Balancer. All right, that's this one right here. So Spring Cloud Load Balancer is present, and it gives us the ability to do load balancing. Now, by default, we're going to have ribbon in play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you low-level interactions with the load balancing API, and then how to use it in lieu of ribbon for load balancing. Well, look at that. That one seems to have worked. I don't know what was going on, but it's fine now. All right, so client application, and open this up. This will be a application called client. Okay, we're fine running on port 8080, which is the default port anyway. And we're going to demonstrate the lowest level use of the load balancer with the reactive load balancer factory. Okay. All right. And we're going to inject a reactive load balancer factory of service instance. So again, it's agnostic of any particular load balancer. Okay, so service factory get instance, and I want to talk to API. That's the service in the registry, right? So it gives me a reactive load balancer because I'm using the reactive load balancer factory. Once I have the reactive load balancer, I can then say, hey, let's choose one. Okay, and I can choose one by providing context or just pick any old random one. That's what I want. I just want any old random one based on whatever heuristic the load balancer is using by default, which is traditionally something like round robin or LRU, least recently used. I'm going to choose an instance, and what I get is a publisher, a reactive stream publisher. So I don't actually want a publisher that's a little low level. I want a flux. So I tend to just wrap this. I just say flux.from, and that adapts the publisher into a reactor flux, which is also a publisher with a lot more APIs, a lot more operators. Okay. So chosen. Okay. And once we have that, I'm going to take the data. I'm going to take the result. I'm going to map it. I'm going to say I've got a response service instance. I'm going to turn that into a URL. Okay. So I'm going to say response get server. That's going to give me a server instance. I'm going to say I want the URL to be http server.get host server.get port greetings. Okay, log.info. I'm going to log that out just so we can see that it's actually resolving something, right? So we'll log it out there. And then we'll return it. So URL. And once I've returned it, I can then use that to make a network call. I'm going to say, given a URL, call the service. Okay, call the service. And what do I want to do? I want to call the service and get the data back. I'm going to do this a couple times. So let's actually do something kind of gross here. I'm just going to make this work, right? So I'm going to say, give me a flux of greeting call and string URL and web client. Okay, we're going to use a reactive web client to make this call. So here we are. And we need a DTO to represent the data coming in from across the wire. So private string greetings. Okay. No args constructor. There we are. Okay. So we're going to take that. We're going to make a call across the wire. We're going to say, okay, client application dot call, and we're going to use it. We're going to create a reactive web client. So var http equals web client. And again, normally you'd use the inbuilt one. We're just going to use the one that the framework provides. I'm just going to provide my own here just to show you there's no magic up my sleeves. I'm going to pass in the URL, okay? And then I'm going to subscribe. So I'll say log out, given a greeting response, log out. This is going to be called manual, okay? We're going to be making a manual call here. We're going to log it out the old-fashioned way. Alrighty, so that should work. This is a little hackety, whatever, okay? Now, what are we actually doing here? We're saying http.get.uri.url.retrieve body2flux greeting.class. Okay, that's all I'm doing. I'm just saving myself from having to retype that next time. So that's one way to do it. Let's see if that works, okay? So we're expecting, basically, I'm going to choose an instance, and then from that chosen instance, I'm going to get a service instance. I'm going to get a response containing a service instance. That service instance represents the best choice, the best place for me to send this request. I build up a URL using the information in the service instance. I log it out just for posterity so we can see what's going on. I then turn that into a network call over the wire using the reactive web client, the instance of which I built up here. The object, the type is actually just web client. I use var. Okay, so let's run this code to see what we get. Cool. So we see the instance logged here on the console, IP and port and status, the resource endpoint. We have the output, greetings equals hello world, so that's working great. Okay, that's a little low level, but it works. Now, what if we could make short work of a lot of this, like all of that? I would love to just have it applied automatically, right? And actually, most of this, all I really care about is I have an HTTP client and I have a URL, make the call. Everything before, to derive the URL, that seems rather wasteful, right? It's tedious. I don't want to do that. So let's create another thing here. We're going to call it the web client runner, okay? Create a constructor there, okay? And what we're going to do is create another HTTP client, but this time we're going to create a client with a filter. We're going to configure a filter, okay? And the filter, var filter, equals new, what do we want? It's an exchange filter function, so it's reactor load balancer exchange filter function, and it in turn takes a factory of load balancer factory. So for service instance, right? So that's basically this here. We can inject the same thing. Service instance factory. This is an exchange filter function. This is the mechanism that you use to customize the HTTP client. Okay, put that in there. And voila. Okay, now we've got a HTTP client that's a little bit smarter because of that. It'll do the work for us. So now I can say call HTTP, and the URL will be API/greetings. Okay, and all I got to do is subscribe to that, and I'll say greeting log.info, and we're going to call this filter greeting.toString. So this one, I'm making the network call. I'm configuring the HTTP client, but I don't have to do a lot of work. I can just say API, and it automatically substitutes what would have been a host and port for a service ID. It goes to the service registry. It picks all the instances that match. This way, in this case, there's only one, but it would pick 5 or 10 or whatever, and then it round robin load balances across them. until it picks an instance, and then it forwards the call for us. All because we configured this nifty reactor load balancer exchange filter function. Okay, so there's manual and there's filter. Both work, both give us the same response, just one's a lot less work. Now we can go a step further. We can actually have Spring Cloud configure this exchange filter function for us. Actually, you might have already done something like this before, right? You can actually say web client, right? Web client, and you inject the web client builder. So web client dot builder dot build, right? And you can actually make the factory itself load balanced, right? And that is here, web client dot builder, and we say return web client dot builder. Okay, load balanced tells Spring Cloud to configure a load balanced web client. The problem is, by default, the thing that comes out of it will have the old Netflix ribbon load balancing, right? So let's say we instead injected, let's do this again. So here we'll say at component at log4j2 class configured web client runner, right? I should probably create some tests, but that's not what I'm doing right now. And we're just going to inject it, right? HTTP. So here we're going to say call HTTP API greetings, and when the greeting comes back, log.info configured .toString. Okay, same basic idea as before, much less work as you can imagine, but still, this is using ribbon. Let's watch what happens. Okay, configured, filter, manual, and ribbon. I guess we could call that ribbon. That's the configured one. That's the new one. We can actually tell it to not use ribbon by going here, load balancer, false. So we don't ribbon enabled by default. We want the new stuff. Cool. Same result. It's just that now we're using Spring Cloud Load Balancer all the way through, right? How cool is that, huh? I'm a big fan of this framework. It gives us the ability to do a lot of cool stuff. Another thing that you might want to do is to cache entries, like cache resolved instances. So there's actually an auto configuration that will kick in if you have caffeine, which is a Spring Cache. You know, we have the Spring Cache abstraction, and if you have caffeine on the class path, then that will work in conjunction with the Spring Cache abstraction and a particular cache manager implementation called caffeine. So you can actually say caffeine, it's this one, and the version is, of course, caffeine.version, and you know, bring that in, and that'll activate the auto config for that. So let's see, group. There we are. Now this is good if you don't want to have, like, imagine you have this network call here. You're making a call. Well, each time it sees that host and port, that service ID, it's going to go to the service registry, get a new instance, do load balancing, and then so on. But what if you could skip that round trip across the network each time, right? What if the next time you made a call, it didn't have to, make that call to the registry? So caffeine can be very good there. It's up to you. You don't have to use it. I mean, just make sure you understand what's happening there. It's just nice to know that they've thought about that and that it's already in play if you want it to be. All right, my friends. I hope you learned something about this. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. Spring Cloud Load Balancer, super useful, really accessible, a million times more accessible than the load balancer stuff that Ribbon had. I've actually written a Ribbon compliant load balancer as well, and that was I felt really stupid. I didn't I didn't really understand what I was doing, but it's easy to follow this API. And I'm just very glad it's here. I'm glad it's so easy to use, and it's so seamless. Again, by the time you use it, your life is this. Your life is a URL that you pass to the web client. So maybe you'll never even know, but now you do. Thanks so much for watching, my friends, and as usual, we'll see you next time.